So hi everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Prairie Organics Conference. So I'm here with my buddy Stuart McMillan, and I know that a lot of, or most of you in the organic sector know Stuart. So I brought him into this talk because A, he's an organic producer, so obviously very up on crops and pricing, but probably even more importantly, in terms of background for being a grain data sleuth, is his background with the Canadian Wheat Board. It was there that Stuart was able to figure out where all the various organic grains and conventional grains grew in the world based on their soils and climates. So that's been very useful. He was able to find a lot of data in that job. And I can tell you, and I preface every talk I give about organic data, I can tell you that there is no organic data. There are no organic data anywhere. So that's hence the title, Organic Grain Sleuths. Okay, so that's the intro for Stuart. And I am the organic specialist for Manitoba government, and I have been the organic specialist for the last 10 years. And before that, I worked for Canadian organic growers in Ottawa. And it was through that experience that I got a very national perspective on the Canadian agricultural scene. So I bring you 17 years of kind of watching organics ebb and flow. And I thought that the first presentation today was a really good introduction to this talk. So think about the things that Joanne said when we touch on particular grains, and often from a farmer's perspective, it can be very opaque, wondering why something is suddenly moving and why people are all of a sudden eating buckwheat or whatever. And that's why you have to keep an eye on consumer trends. And that was the whole point of her giving kind of the big picture presentation about what's going on. And we live in an era of change, and that change impacts us in this sector as well. So what Stuart and I are going to do for the next hour or so is take you through 5 kind of randomly selected grains. We sort of picked them because they're important for Manitoba organic growers, but they're also kind of diverse, and they would make a good diverse organic crop rotation. So they're not necessarily the most economically important grains that we're going to be talking about, but I think all of them have really good economic potential. So we're gonna discuss kind of the ins and outs of those grains as we try to follow the data around the world. So we know that you grow those grains here in Manitoba, but then what? What happens to them? Where do they go? Who buys them? Who sells them? Who imports them? And who ultimately eats them? Those are the questions that we were trying to track down. So the 5 grains that we've chosen, well, maybe I'll keep it a mystery and we'll just start going through them. So the first one, well, let's back up a bit and talk a little bit about data. So this is data from the Canada Organic Trade Association, and they get it in turn from the certifying bodies in Canada, of which there are many, and you can imagine it's a big job trying to corral them into doing yet more paperwork. So this is 2020 data. It has not really, the stuff that we're going to be presenting today has not been released anywhere. And the Prairie stuff will form the basis of a report that I am working on with CODA, Canada Organic Trade Association, and PODF, the Prairie Organic Development Fund. And data is always at least a year out of date. So this is kind of the national snapshot of where the organic growers live. And you can see increasingly they live in Quebec. And that's partly because Quebec has a lot of opportunities if you're an organic grower, especially if you're a maple producer. There's money to be had to transition to organic in that province. They tend to be smaller farms, and you can see where Manitoba is situated. We're probably doing better than PEI, but not so much when you compare us with other provinces on the left there. So Manitoba is a small player in the general scheme of things. This is kind of more detail. I'm going to hand it over to Stuart. So what we're going to do from here on in is kind of go back and forth, and we should have rehearsed this, who does what slide. So I'm going to hand it off to Stuart to go through the prairie data.
Yeah, we thought it would be useful for us to zoom in a little bit on the prairies and focus on that. And so with the context of the growth in Quebec, you could see that over the past 5 years, 6 years, the percentage that of the number of Canadian growers that the prairies represent has actually been on a steady decrease. And overall, I guess you could say is that, yeah, over the past 6 years, the number of prairie operations has increased, but the pace of increase has really kind of slowed since about 2018, from a very sort of healthy annual increase to essentially just a flat line. Obviously, if we're going to think through, probably not going to see a significant change in 2021. If anything, perhaps a bit of a dip, and likely the same for 2022, but that's, you know, a bit of a guesswork there. So if we look through in terms of the overall acreage, again, perhaps this won't come as a surprise. So we have the yellow representing all of the provinces combined, and then with Alberta in blue, Saskatchewan green, and Manitoba in orange. We can definitely see that, you know, certainly the majority of acreage remains in Saskatchewan. We're kind of really at a bit of a holding pattern between there. Manitoba acres really kind of dropped as we go in for looking from, 2020, going from 128,000 down to 103. So we suspect that we're going to see that data again coming through for 2021, that there'll be further losses across all 3 prairie provinces, really. Big driver of that for you farmers in the audience, no surprise, we had a bunch of years of pretty stagnant prices and stagnant demand, kind of carried on really until, midsummer here in the past year when prices started to go crazy. But they started to go crazy on conventional prices as well. So obviously for farmers, they need to see the value for the increased work to maintain your organic status. And the past 2 years or more have not seen a lot of price premiums.
Okay, so here is the first surprise crop. So we're going to talk about flax in a bit of depth. It's an interesting crop from a prairie perspective because all of it is grown here in 3 provinces. Alberta less so, but for sure it's an important crop in the organic sectors in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. In 2020, there was a total of 41,000 acres worth just over $13 million. You'll see more details in the graphs to come, but this represents a 25% decline in flax acreage since 2015. In terms of import-export stuff, Canada is very well placed in terms of organic flax processing capacity. Only about 21% of the crop is exported unprocessed. And as any farmer on this call knows, current prices have reached overall highs. Yeah,
so if we look through to, oh, sorry, you're doing acreage.
Yeah, so these are the flax acres by province, and the white bars show you that flax is really a Saskatchewan thing. Alberta and Manitoba are really bit players in the flax scene. If you look on the right graph, you could see that sadly organic flax has been in decline since 2015, with a peak of 73,000 acres in 2017. Okay, this one's all Stuart.
Yeah, so as a lower kind of preference, data is pretty nigh on to impossible to come. So yeah, we can get acreage data, how you get into production, where, you know, what's the carry out, what's the value. Takes a little bit of educated guesswork. In this case, we pulled the Manitoba crop insurance data from 2020, as well as the Saskatchewan crop insurance data for 2018. Alberta had nothing to use, so we just kind of carried those forward. So you can quibble about the yield, the bushel yield number, which is going to drive our production in both in bushels and metric tons, and ultimately the value. Market value, we just took as an average from the POGI data. So certainly, if we look through that, we kind of end up at about that. That's how we got to the 13.5 million number for 2020. And again, not surprisingly, we've got a fairly heavy presence of all of that production and value coming out of Saskatchewan.
Okay, so now we're going on to flax exports. You can see that the peak of our exports, and this is Ag Canada data, and I was very happy to get back on their export list.
And this is full flax seed, not any other flax byproducts, correct?
Right, thank you. Yes, so this is essentially flax that is shipped out of our country unprocessed. So it's always good to test the integrity of the numbers by actually figuring out if we grew that much. So you can see that the value in 2020 was 2.5 million, and we exported just over 2,000 metric tons. So we go back to the previous slide to ask ourselves, did we in fact grow this? Yes, we grew 10,000 metric tons worth 13 million. So what this tells me is that we are keeping most of the flax to ourselves and processing it here. Okay, so where does it go? Oh, this is alluding to Stuart's comment. So this is flax that has been turned into oil before it's shipped out of Canada. And you can see it's relatively small value, but the only data I was able to unearth on this is to go in from the US side, and that's why this is in US dollars. So this is the Foreign Ag Service, and this happens to be one of the import codes that they track. So I should have prefaced this entire discussion about import and export codes. You know, the world works on harmonized series codes, and up until about 10 years ago, we had none of them for organic. So flax was flax, and it was all lumped together. Now we rely heavily on exporters to code their organic flax with its own special code. And we hope that people processing conventional flax do not code their flax as organic. And that always doesn't always pan out for us, but we're at least starting the process of collecting data. Okay, so this is where flax goes. Essentially, it goes to America. So remember, I said the total was 2.5 million. With those top 5 countries there, it's almost all of that 2.5 million, and almost all of that goes to the US. And then if you look on the chart on the right, you'll see that almost all of it is shipped directly out of the prairie. And I don't know if this is true, but I suspect that what that means is that the flax is getting on a truck and heading south to the US. because if it's getting onto a boat, you'll often see the export records list British Columbia or Quebec as the port of exit. So you can see here that most of the flax is shipped by truck to America from Saskatchewan. So there you go. You know more about where flax goes than you did 2 minutes ago.
Right. So, as in all commodities, we a lot of times we want to talk about, well, am I getting undermined by foreign product coming in and ruining my market? For the majority of those questions, there ain't no data. But there is data for Argentina because they have an entire system of taxation of all agricultural exports to drive the government funding. So they have very clear records of what goes where. So if we wanted to talk about organic flax imports from Argentina into Canada, we could say, yeah, in recent years, it's been kind of nigh on to negligible. There was back in 2018, a couple of hundred, metric tons came in. There was one container of 22 tons. But historically, if we go back to kind of that period 2012 to 2016, Canada would sometimes be receiving 50% of all of the organic flax exports from Argentina. So, I think it is important to kind of say back that was, about 1,382 metric tons came in back in that 2012. But our annual production is around 10,000 metric tons currently, and it was much higher then. There's a number of other sources of origin for flax, and obviously if you do your deductive work, they're going to match up growing regions where flax is grown internationally anyways, so that leaves us principally with the Black Sea region or the former Soviet Union as the drivers. Kazakhstan being a big one, bit out of Russia, bit out of Ukraine. There's some weird ones that also factor in. Certainly India has got some organic flax up for export right now. No huge volumes. We're the number 3 source for Indian exports. Canada is, but that's with the United States taking the lion's share, the EU getting a big share, and then Canada is kind of getting a share. But again, the volumes coming out of India on the flax side are going to be fairly limited, but Kazakhstan's a real player. But kind of as you may well know, the reason why conventional prices are absolutely reaching stratospheric highs is Kazakhstan, just like North Dakota, Montana, and all the Canadian prairies, was hammered by drought, and it hammered the flax hard. And so the Kazakh crop was equally hammered. So they're not going to have a large volume to export into our market unless for some reason they had essentially, significant carryout that they had in stock. But the majority of Kazakh flax goes to the EU. So the other side is if we start digging in on Canadian flax processing capacity, there is a lot of Canadian companies that process and package whole and milled flax, seed, produced oils from seed. We undoubtedly will have missed some players in this and noted actually as we kind of go through this. There's probably somebody with it don't have on this list that some farmer says, hey, if I sold them and they process it. But we tried to find those that we could, the main ones that we could find, and ones that, was clear in terms of having a role in the Canadian prairies. The other, again, there's a number of natural product companies that take flax oil, put it into capsules, into other sorts of food supplement side of things. So again, this may not be an exhaustive list. The other side is that there's a significant, like even one of our exhibitors, HFI, will be one of the importers taking whole seed from Canada to supplement the North Dakota, Montana production for their facility down in North Dakota. Terra Ingredients over in Minnesota would also fall into that category. Interestingly, Schoolers just opened up a new flax processing plant in Regina as of January. Facility is going to be marketing flax food and livestock. But again, thought it was interesting that one of the main market focuses would be in the pet food industry. But as you can see, we've got a wide range of companies going from Quebec all the way to BC in terms of processors. But there's a handful of companies that are going to be doing the majority of processing, and that's probably down to about 3 Saskatchewan-based companies that are going to be hitting the vast majority of product. So, wow, well. If you had flax sitting in your bin, you're kind of happy with things. So these were monthly prices from organicbiz.ca. Organic Alberta has kept their eye on these prices and aggregated them together. We thank them for the work they did. So you can usually find up-to-date graphs at pivotandgrow.ca. Where there's a gap, just meant that there was no bid that month, so they ends up, not being clear in terms of that. Yeah, no surprise. Both organic and conventional flax had a massive run up this fall, reflecting extremely low carryout and extremely low production, and end users and processors trying to snag up whatever they could get their hands on. So we've seen contract prices come down a bit on the conventional side, and likely that's also occurred on the organic side. Honestly, I think you could offer $100 a bushel right now and you still not be able to attract in the remaining organic flax that is out there. At a certain point, though, I know speaking with growers, the overall consensus was once we hit that 70, anywhere between 70 to 80 bucks a bushel, you're kind of crazy not to sell it if you can get a truck in and get it out and get that money in your jeans. So as far as bids, I think there's still, although the data shows it's dropped a bit, speaking with some others, they'd say not really. They're still showing those highs. Not a lot of forward contracts being offered as of yet, but few we've seen out there got as much as 25 bucks a bushel on the conventional market, so essentially nearly double the long-term average. And similar on the organic side, forward contracts at 55 bucks a bushel for organic brown and 60 bucks a bushel for organic yellow. But there's not a lot of forward contracts out there. And I think a number of grain marketers are reluctant to put a price out without knowing what's going to happen for alternative supplies to get us through to harvest 2022. So we'll just take a look over at trends. I kind of covered a lot of them there. Obviously, record high prices, very tight global supply, very low carryout around the world. Global demand for flax continues to grow. We've got, and it continues to kind of grow about 10.8% a year because of the non-GMO source of a healthy omega-3 fatty acid fibers. It's used in pet foods and livestock additives, both for joint health, glossy coats. Produces high omega-3 fatty acids into the eggs, as well as giving them yellower coloring. We got the new first new flax plant being built in 10 years, so it's interesting on the prairie side. But definitely we've got, one of our thoughts was why we're seeing flax acres decline was that some of those acres were going into hemp. Because it's going to also benefit from the similar rotational position where organic flax used to be, and strong demand on the organic hemp side. So that's certainly a factor. And gosh, I've learned more than ever as an organic farmer. Flax really only goes in a handful of spots in your rotation. And if you try to chase that 75 buck a bushel, if you don't got the right rotational position, it really doesn't pan out economically or yield-wise.
Okay, so hopefully you know everything you need to know about flax now. So let's move on to surprise crop number 2, which is maybe not such a big surprise, organic oats. And most of you who are watching know that almost all of the organic oats grown in Canada are produced right here in the good old prairie. In 2020, Stuart and I estimated that farmers made close to $81 million selling oats. And only about 20, like flax, it's not a big export crop. Only about 20% of the unprocessed crop is exported. Okay, so here's the acreage. And Saskatchewan doesn't win by a landslide this time because Alberta is quite a player in the organic oat world. And unlike flax, you can see on the right that there has been nowhere to go but up. And I think part of this is because producers like growing oats. They get an okay return on it, but more importantly, there is a very reliable Canadian market. That one's you, Stuart.
All right, okay. Apparently I was off on that. So yes, again, if we kind of go with a similar sort of yield as well as evaluations, when we look at that, nearly 13 million bushels or $80 million in product, we end up having a sort of a split where essentially Saskatchewan and Alberta are really about equal in terms of the valuation and the production side of things. Yeah. And now if we get into the oat exports, we've got total exports coming out of Canada at $14.3 million in 2020. Yes, that's right. Yep. And volumes kind of pushing around the following similar trends really in terms of the production as well.
Okay, so these are where our organic oats go to. So total exports are just over 14 million in 2020. And you can see that the leaderboard is the US at just over 7 million. We suspect that a lot of this unprocessed oat is really one major buyer shipping to a sister company based in the US. So not sure about that, but that's a guess. Second country is Japan, which is one of those traditional organic buyers. And they used to be a much, much bigger buyer of Canadian product. Vietnam is interesting to me, and you'll see on a number of these slides that it is coming up as a big customer of Canada's for organic product. I know this isn't much money, but you'll see more buying on other slides. So this is coming again out of Saskatchewan, same hypothesis that I had for flax, that this relatively small portion of the Canadian crop that is exported unprocessed, sorry, is going by truck from Saskatchewan down to mills in probably Minnesota. That's a guess. So who's buying these oats? Grain millers, Richardson. I put down a small player in Manitoba, Buffalo Creek Mills. They're based in eastern Manitoba, and I think it's just very small quantities. Check in with our friends at the GOC booth to find out more about this. I think it's public because I saw something public on it, but Patterson Global Foods is building a new oat mill at the Winnipeg airport, and it's expected to be operational at the end of this year. So that might shake up the oat industry a little bit, but go ask Dwayne and see what he has to say about that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's still also other smaller oat processors in Saskatchewan as well, to add on to that. But we kind of viewed it as, you know, the dominant kind of players, grain millers, then Richardson, and then everybody else kind of below that. So, you know, for oats, it really was one of those crops that if you ask, well, what's the value of oats? I'd be like, $6, somewhere around $6 a bushel. It really was a fairly steady sort of organic valuation. If you look at it from 2012 all the way through to 2020, with a few ebbs and flows here and there. But again, oats really did not perform well during those exceptionally hot days that hit it right sort of at flowering. This is got experience on that one. So really oat yields were really hammered by some of the weather. It wasn't that the acres weren't there, it's just production took a nosedive really in 2021. But so right along with that, then we've seen prices where, you know, forward contracts for conventional oats are at the same price that organic was a year ago. So we definitely have seen some volatility in the oat acres. Again, forward contracts, you know, above $10 are seemingly fairly common right now. So it's one of those crops that if you can get the seed for it, which is a challenge because I know I managed to lock up mine back in the fall because with conventional prices sitting at $6, there's going to be there is a strong need to rebuild our stocks on oats because time we get to August, the whole oat processing industry is going to be running on fumes. So they need to have an attractive price to command the acres to get back up the volume needed to get through 2022, 23. And yeah, so I kind of already did it again where I spoke a bit some of the trends. But yeah, so as I say, low carryout, record high prices, high contract prices going forward. Oat milk is certainly becoming a more important driver. And that's a bit of the challenge with these codes is that, yeah, obviously the main export coming out of Canada isn't raw oats. It's going to be the oats that are processed here in Western Canada going out as oat flakes, milled oats, and so like oat flour and other products to kind of feed into the food processing industry. Certainly the gluten-free trend on oats is showing no signs of slowing. So we certainly do see a couple of dedicated gluten-free oat plants in the prairies, as well as non-dedicated plants who are still able to test and reach a gluten-free purity level.
Okay, third mystery crop is hemp. And I'll come clean on this part of the presentation and let you know that I stole much of my information out of the brain of Clarence at Manitoba Harvest. So if you want the real dirt, go talk to Clarence. And he's actually doing a presentation right after this this talk. So go and chat with him and he'll give you more of the insider stuff. So those of you who've been following hemp know that Canada is the global leader for both conventional and organic hemp, and that the majority of it, and I think it's more than 85%, is grown in the prairies. The seed is worth 16 million to farmers, i.e. before processing, and then processing adds another 45 million. So you can see that food processing is a huge economic multiplier and a huge driver for economic activity. Negligible imports at this point. About 50% of processed hemp is exported, and the main destination is the US. So here's hemp acres, and you can see from the chart on the right, after a brief downturn in 2018, and who knows, maybe that's a rotational thing, or maybe it was a market glitch. Hemp has suffered many market glitches because unlike other crops, it hasn't had 50 or 100 years to develop its market. So it's still relatively new, and you expect ups and downs for fairly new crops. But still quite impressive growth. The hemp leader, for those of you on the call from Alberta, you will be pleased to hear that Alberta is the hemp leader. And that has mostly to do with the way that hemp is grown in Alberta. A good chunk of the hemp is grown under irrigation, and hemp seems to love irrigation. And producers in Manitoba and Saskatchewan aren't doing that much yet, although I did hear of one who did it in Manitoba and he did really well with it. So a lot of, well, actually, this chart on the left is acres. We'll get to productivity. So Alberta is bigger on acres, but it's way bigger on productivity. So here's that productivity. You can see the pounds of production there, that Alberta is at twice the poundage versus Saskatchewan. And that's because I put down a yield of 750, and you can actually get much higher yields under irrigation. So I kind of averaged the higher irrigation yield with the lower unirrigated yield of 500 and got 750. But that's why you see such enormous production out of Alberta. And again, these prices that we've mostly used were taken from organicbiz.com. So thank you to Glacier Farm Media for having that organic addition to their portfolio. I'm sure farmers appreciate having prices available.
Yeah, so if we look to the organic hemp estimated value of processed foods, so we're looking at around that $45 million. The organic hemp grain imports to Canada are really not significant. There's a smidgen that comes erratically out of the Baltic region, so Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, again, but that's not necessarily a big driver. We could certainly see possibly coming out. I mean, China has come in and out of the market, but understanding is that China is nowhere to be seen on the organic hemp side right now, especially in Canada. Might be a bit coming into the United States, which could compete with us. But again, not a lot of that is kind of is a factor, really kind of impacting. We got a domestic production and domestic processing with a eager buyer just to the south of our border. So if we look at the domestic processors, again, certainly not going to be capturing all of them. The main one really, especially once we saw the merger of Manitoba Harvest and Hemp Canada became Fresh Hemp Foods. They've certainly got the main part of it. Hemp production services, also some processes, hemp hearts and oils. We've got Better Hemp Company doing some processing in Manitoba. Gold Top Organics up and around the Edmonton area is doing a bit, as well as you've got Hempco out in Alberta. They've got a processing facility there, and we'll do some direct contracting. Originals also in around the Saskatoon area, doing some meal, oil powder, seed cake and screenings. Then there's, goodness knows, all kinds of small brokers and other company in there. That my value add in hemp had attracted a number of players, but the question is, do you stay in it in the long run? And that's where we've kind of seen the market really shake down to being a few of the companies that have been around. And certainly as a producer, I'm not comfortable in contracting my hemp with some weird bit player who's, sort of just, they're not a known proven commodity. There have been too many times that people have seen contracts at very attractive prices, but then been stuck with a buyer who doesn't pay their bills promptly and leaves a sore taste in your mouth. So certainly that's kind of one of those factors that comes in. We'll talk a little bit about prices though as well.
I just wanted
So,
to say that if you tuned in hoping for an opinion-free zone, sorry about that.
hey, I left it upstairs, but I wanted to preface is that since I'm now just speaking as a farmer and I'm not representing anybody else, I can put my grumpy farmer hat on at any point in time. I am no longer muzzled like I've been in the past. The truth shall flow. Yeah. Um, Anyways, so as we've kind of seen, sounded a bit like a broken record, but um, obviously strong demand on the organic hemp side has translated to a steady increase in prices. Yes, there's some gaps in that. We've seen hemp go from that, $1.25, sort of a pound. And the preface on this, this is one of those commodities that's really just done as a price quotes in pounds and productions in pounds. But yeah, going from that $1.25, $1.30 to really, pushing up to the $1.75. And going forward, it sounds like that there's contracts for just over $2 a bushel on the organic side for 2022. So yeah, strong prices. Obviously, we might see that come down once we get some more production and supplies come through, but it seems to be more of a production issue and not a demand issue when we speak with organic hemp. Yeah, so again, we can kind of see the percentage also of organic to conventional hemp has seen a dramatic shift. It's one of those shocking crops where there's more organic acres produced than there are conventional now, which is, unheard of for just about any commodity. In fact, I think I couldn't think of another commodity that's in that scenario. Canadians continue to consume more hemp products per capita compared to the United States, but the US market is now consuming about 50% of Canadian hemp. Certainly, we've kind of seen, hemp has got one of those as an interesting crop. You've got the food market, you've got the fiber market, but then the whole CBD market as well. Dual market use is yet to really kind of pan out from our understanding. CBD market shifting quite a lot to more specialized producers who are really we're treating it like a horticultural crop. And maybe that really makes sense because when you view that CBD, it's really you're producing a pharmaceutical crop, not a food crop, and certainly not a feed crop or a fiber crop. So we'll see that differentiation there. But CBD is not a big driver. When we look to the Canadian market, the US came out gangbusters when they opened up a lot of the states' hemp production. We saw a huge rise in CBD acres, but again, a lot of small players, a lot of them kind of failed to provide the economic returns they were projecting, and a lot of those acres pulled back out. And it's unlikely to see that be a significant driver in the US side, at least in my opinion.
Okay, this one is probably no surprise, other than the fact that I said it was 0.033% of Canadian organic oats are grown in the prairie. Sorry, something obviously screwed up there. It's 93%. So 375,000 acres in 2020, 237,000 metric tons of production, worth $118 million. There are some imports, and you'll see from the rest of this presentation that that's the big black box, and that's the question that people always ask is, how much wheat is coming into Canada? I have to get Stuart to say that in his curmudgeon voice. Yeah, so we'll get to that. Here's the acres. Saskatchewan wins. If this is a game and you've got Saskatchewan playing cards, you get a point. But I have to say organic wheat is very, very important to the organic sector in the prairie. So all of you out there, keep eating your bread and your cereal bars and everything else that has organic wheat in it, supporting Cliff Bar. Yeah, so you can see that except for a major glitch in 2019, wheat acres have been doing nothing but go up. Farmers like it. It's for last year. It traditionally has paid well. Yeah. Here's the production. And of course, as Stuart mentioned, yield is probably the biggest question we have. If we were actually wanting to do a good job of estimating the value of the crop, we should know what the yield was for every crop. But so to put an average of 23 bushels an acre across the prairie is kind of meaningless. But hey, you got to come up with some numbers somehow. So you do pull these out of a hat. And I didn't point out earlier that Manitoba Agricultural Services Corporation, and go talk to Dan and his buddy at his booth before you leave here, because they produce some really good data on their website. And I haven't been able to find the same publicly accessible data about yields and production on the organic side in the other two provinces. So that's something that would be amazing to have. Of course, if I'd had the time, I would have called those crop insurance corporations and asked them for data. I know I asked Arlen Frick a few years ago for data to do this same exercise in Saskatchewan, and he was very generous about providing yield data. But yeah, it would be awesome. You know, it's just my general plug about data. Let's make it all publicly available so farmers can make better decisions. Yeah, so no big surprise. Organic wheat is worth a lot of money, $117.5 million in 2020.
So the wheat exports, we definitely have, again, there might be a little suspect. So I mean, if for 2020, sales of this volume would translate into about $10 or $10.50 or less than $10.50 a bushel. Even that low, even by the standards of 2020. So we might be seeing some variability in some of that data. But certainly you could see that, you know, in 2019, 2020, we were just hovering around that, you know, just shy of that 100 million in terms of wheat exports. And remember, this is strictly wheat grain exports, as opposed to other commodities. And so we were able to tease out 2 years worth of data for organic flour exports into the United States. So we can see, you know, from 2020, the value, and not again the volume, just the value, dropping from around that 10 million down to around 5 million. Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of see that data continue from the FAS, USDA FAS, so we could at least get a better sense of that. But it does seem reasonable that exports of flour are going to be a very small component relative to whole grain that is then milled in the United States closer to the end users market. It really kind of would be similar. We certainly see the same thing on the conventional side. It's not that there's a big inverse in the flour exports versus the grain exports.
Okay, so in this case, the data from Ag Canada actually splits out durum wheat from hard red spring. So you can see, if you look at the lower graph in hard red spring, because I know that's what you Manitobans care about, you can see the interesting array of countries that are buying our wheat. Like, why is Vietnam buying $24 million of Canadian organic wheat? So I will leave that question for you to ponder because I do not have the answer. Do you, Stuart?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, no, there's an interesting, the USDA has these gain reports. So essentially they're deep dives into certain markets. And they had a gain report looking at the growth of the organic sector in Vietnam. They felt a number of things. A, it's one of the quickest rising economies in Southeast Asia, growing middle class, a large interest in youth in terms of organic products. They kind of had data on the number of internet searches for the Vietnamese words surrounding organic food, and there's been a steady trend over the past 5 years. So it's definitely one of the growing organic markets. It's just what doesn't make sense is that they're buying Canadian hard red spring and not Aussie wheat. I mean, quality differences, yes, but the Australian organic sector has a massive, massive advantage to us when it comes from a shipping market. Those are my 2 bits.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, let's get to the imports because I want to hear Stuart prognosticate about that.
Oh, well, put that grumpy hat on. The Argentines are shafting us. They're always shafting us. Well, yeah, Argentina is a significant wheat producer. If you look at their organic cereal acres, and again, because they actually got data, you can go back 20 years worth of growth in their acres, what crops it's falling under, which province is it grown in. Buenos Aires province is the biggest in the organic acres. That's their prime wheat growing area. And they're able to do dual crop there. So you grow wheat in the winter and then soy in the summer. Works as a pretty nifty kind of crop rotation. So yes, certainly we could see, and again, if it goes to the United States, it's still taking away market share for Canada. What I kind of found interesting, so I mean, Canada does come into play. We certainly can see that when it terms of sort of, it would be interesting, but I don't think we have the good data to show that when prices really hit the toilet in 2018 into 2019, the Argentines just stopped exporting. My kind of curiosity is that when you look to the acres in 2019, you don't see a massive shift into other crops that would be in the same rotational position, such as oats, barley, or other winter crops. There is a possibility that the Argentines could be sitting on a massive, massive kind of glut of wheat because they just looked at the market. I don't know that there was any significant production challenges in 2019 that would correspond to that drop. But I think, we certainly, and for 2020, their wheat exports, there was data for it. They were just not going to any of those markets. They're marketing into odd places that you wouldn't expect. So they were selling a bucket load of wheat into Colombia. There's a bunch going into there. They had exports going to Vietnam. So there was data. They just stopped selling into the other lucrative top 4 markets. And it wasn't even going to Japan either, which didn't appear in here. But again, you got to put this into context. So, I mean, there were certainly in periods where there was, sort of 6,000-7,000, sort of metric tons coming in from Argentina, but Canada was producing around 237,000 metric tons of wheat. And so, so that's less than 3% of imports. So, that's certainly going to come into, it's less than, sort of what's produced in a summer. So, and so we do also, there are still some wheat coming in from other locations, but not significant volumes, honestly, if we had to try to look for it. It's just logistically, it makes sense for products from Argentina to get loaded on a boat on that side, brought up and into East Coast mills or East Coast exporters. But other locations, it really just doesn't make logistical sense when you look at a cost of production and transport issues. So,
yeah, and I just want to add, Stuart, that you and I have had this conversation that we kind of hypothesize that Canadian wheat millers use a certain amount of imports in their wheat blends just to get the properties that they want. So that's kind of an ongoing low-level thing. They might import different types of wheat than we grow. And then there's the kind of big sporadic imports. And those happen, I think, in times of scarcity but also in times where local price becomes a trigger to import lower cost wheat. That's speculation there, but hey, that's
Right.
what you have to invest for, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. So it serves as kind of a lid on domestic price per bushel. If you can get it on a boat from a location X into Canada and into, you know, sort of an offloading facility somewhere in Quebec and Ontario, definitely kind of factors in on that.
Yep. So we're kind of running low on time. So let's get to our conclusion so we could have some questions. We have a few more slides. This is just to show you where some of the mills are. I can tell you we could use a few more organic wheat mills in the prairie, but I learned from one wheat miller that it makes sense to put your mill closer to your consumer market. So it's actually cost less to ship the raw product to the mill than it would be to ship the final heavy bags of flour a long distance to your consumers. So there you go. Anyway, I think we could use more processing here. There's not a lot of big processing in the Canadian Prairie, but I think that's why.
Yeah, so again, we've kind of seen quite a lot of volatility in the organic wheat market. So we could be, you know, from lows are kind of down in the low sort of double digits up to, you know, prices, you know, sort of well north of 20. I heard producers getting $30 a bushel for their wheat recently in this market. So between sort of rumor and speculation, but when you look at aggregate kind of round numbers or so, we're certainly back to sort of quite historic pricing. So.
Is this one me, I guess? Wheat trends. Yeah, I think we've gone over them all. Like all the other commodities, it's kind of through the roof. And we are on the cusp of having those prices trigger some wheat imports, which none of us like. Peas. I'm wondering, Stuart, should we skip the P's and just go right to the conclusions? Because we're running out of time.
I didn't realize we kind of were short on time. I think it might make sense, and certainly for maybe if there's some questions afterwards that people want to know on the P side, we could maybe answer them directly.
Okay. But I did download this presentation into the folder for this presentation. So here we go. So this is our summary of value, Stuart.
Yeah, so as we look through, I mean, we can certainly see that organic production in terms of these kind of 5 crops that we took a look at is no insignificant amount. We're looking at over essentially around 250 million in terms of the farm value production in the 2020 year. Again, though that may well be an underestimation given the conservative yield numbers that we were actually using here. So I think we certainly not something to be ignored. I think that's an important thing we should all remember sometimes. So we certainly see in terms of export destinations and that 78, nearly 79% of conventional Canadian commodities wind up in the United States. Organic destinations are quite shifting. You suddenly get certain countries that can seem a bit of a surprise. Instead of that standard view that Canada exports to the United States and then a handful of other countries. For certain commodities, those other countries can be a significant factor, varying on a variety of different conclusions. You know, be that Vietnam, South Korea, or even South American countries that we export into, like Colombia. Oh, got you. So volatility, definitely expect more volatility carrying over into 2022. I don't think it was something that was just isolated to the fall of 2021. Certainly organic producers, I think, are facing a new set of challenges just related to the movement of goods, supply chain logistics, changing markets, erratic weather, climate change factors. All of those things are going to continue going forward. Trucking costs have gone up just in the sheer availability of trucks. And certainly, you know, the amount of time between booking a truck has increased significantly, as well as the expense. So as we saw kind of during the recession, high prices can drive food processors out of organic into natural, and also trigger imports from lower cost producer countries. Certainly challenges, so, you know, maybe the conventional organic producers who rely on manure may be facing competition from conventional neighbors, just looking at the stratospheric high prices of fertilizer. So that might also certainly coming into as a challenge. And I don't know, the high market price in organic may still not be enough to drive expansion in organic acres, just given the current high prices in conventional and that declining premium. So yeah, certainly a number of factors at play, lots of room for speculation.
Okay, so last slide. So if you are listening to this, it may mean that you are amongst the few organic grain farmers left standing. So there's an opportunity. You know, you saw our slides about prices through the roof. Well, there has to be somebody to take advantage of those. You need that organic cert in order to do that. Climate change can be a double-edged sword. During the drought, organic farmers probably left organic, not just because of the bad prices or the lack of markets, but because cultivation was creating a mini desert on their farms. But the other side of that is that organic uses 30% less energy because it avoids fertilizer use. And we all know that government is going to do something on the fertilizer thing, and it'll either be carrots or sticks or a mix of them in order to get Canadian farmers to reduce fertilizer use. So if you're sitting there not using fertilizers, that's already an advantage. Regenerative ag, some of you have embraced this, some of you hate that word and think of it as competition. See it as an add-on. See it as the how you do your organic job, and take ownership of the fact that organic farmers are the ones to come up with many of the methods used in regenerative ag. So see that as an opportunity too. And on the consumer demand side, you know, I've been watching this for many years, and consumer demand for organic has never really gone down, other than a minor glitch during the recession. It has always gone up. So think of that as an opportunity. So if you are still standing, I think if you get the water you need in 2022, it could be a good year to be organic.